All right, so get ready. Today we're going to tackle some seriously deep philosophy.
Oh yeah, diving right in.
You wanted to explore Descartes' ontological argument for the existence of God,
Right.
and you were kind enough to send over those excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah, those should be really helpful.
So our mission, should we choose to accept it,
We should.
is to figure out how Descartes tried to prove God exists using logic aiding into intuition.
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is a big one. Now, I have to say, in preparing for this, I learned some pretty surprising stuff.
Oh really? Like what?
Well, for one, Descartes wasn't the first to use this kind of argument.
Yeah, it has a long history.
Yeah. And the argument itself is so simple, it's almost more like an intuition than a formal proof.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And get this, it caused a ton of controversy back in Descartes' time.
Oh, absolutely.
And guess what?
What?
It still does today.
It sure does. It's a real head scratcher.
So let's start with the basics. How simple are we talking here?
Well, Descartes actually compared his argument to those basic geometric proofs.
Oh, interesting.
You know, like how the angles of a triangle always add up to 180 degrees?
Right.
He wanted to show that God's existence is just as obvious and self-evident as that.
So he was aiming for that. Can't argue with this kind of proof.
Yeah, a slam dunk.
But hold on a sec. You mentioned intuition before.
It did.
Where does that fit into all this?
Well, Descartes believed in what he called clear and distinct perception,
Okay.
meaning we can directly grasp some truths with absolute certainty.
Like how?
Almost like how you see a physical object right in front of you.
Oh, okay.
For Descartes, God's existence was one of those undeniable truths.
So it's not just cold, hard logic.
No.
It's about this inner knowing.
Yeah.
Almost like a eureka moment.
Exactly.
So how does he actually lay out this argument?
Well, he presents two versions of it,
Okay.
both super simple.
Note on me.
All right, so version A, it boils down to this. If we clearly perceive something as part of an idea, then it must be true of that thing.
Okay.
So if we clearly perceive existence as part of the idea of God,
Yeah.
then God must exist.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Good.
What about version B? How's that one work?
So version B, it starts with the idea of a supremely perfect being,
Okay.
like the ultimate best, top of the line kind of being.
Best of the best.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Now, existence itself, Descartes argues, is a perfection.
Okay.
It's better to exist than to not exist.
I think yes, yeah.
So a supremely perfect being, God, must exist.
I see.
Because if God didn't exist,
Right.
well, he wouldn't be so perfect after all.
It is kind of a mind-blowing thought experiment when you really think about it.
It is, yeah.
But it feels like this whole thing kind of hinges on a big philosophical concept.
You're right.
The distinction between essence and existence.
Yeah, that's key.
So for those of us who, haven't cracked open our philosophy textbooks in a while.
Sure.
What does that even mean?
Right.
And why does it matter so much for Descartes' argument?
Okay, so think of it this way. Essence is what something is, like its core definition.
Okay.
While existence is the fact that it's actually out there in the world.
Gotcha.
So Descartes' argument really leans on this idea that for God, essence and existence just can't be separated.
Okay.
But this sparked a lot of debate back in the day,
I bet.
especially during the medieval period.
Oh, really? So this isn't even a new concept that Descartes cooked up.
Oh, no, not at all.
People were already wrestling with this what it means to be question.
Yeah.
Like way before Descartes came along.
Absolutely.
Wow. So what were the medieval folks saying about all this?
Well, they were already using this distinction between essence and existence to try to tell the difference between God and angels.
Okay.
You see, they saw God as perfectly simple, meaning his essence and existence were just one and the same,
Okay.
but created things like angels.
Yeah.
They were seen as like a composite
A composite of.
essence and existence,
Yeah.
like more complex beings.
I see. So we've got this whole backdrop of philosophers grappling with existence.
Right.
What were some of the main viewpoints that came out of all that debate?
Well, you basically had three main camps.
All right, hit me with those three camps.
Okay, so first you had the real distinction folks, and they insisted that essence and existence are completely separate things.
Like oil and water.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's one.
Yeah.
What about the second?
All right, so then there was the intermediate position.
Intermediate.
Yeah, and they offered more nuanced takes.
Nuance is always good. Yeah.
Right, like, for example, Duns Scotus.
Duns Scotus. Okay.
He had this idea of a formal distinction.
Formal distinction.
Yeah, meaning the difference is subtle and it's not a complete separation.
Okay, so two pretty different perspectives.
Yeah.
What about the third camp? What were they saying?
All right, so the third group, they advocated for the rational distinction,
Okay.
and they argued that the difference between essence and existence is only in our minds.
Okay.
It's not actually out there in reality.
So like a mental category.
Yeah, it's like a mental categorization that we make,
Okay.
but ultimately a thing just is.
Interesting. So where does Descartes land in all of this?
Which side did he pick?
Yeah, which team was he on?
Well, he ultimately sided with rational distinction.
Rational distinction. Okay.
But of course, he had to add his own signature twist.
Of course he did. He's Descartes.
Right. So he introduces this idea of different grades of existence.
Grades of existence.
Yeah, you've got contingent existence.
Contingent existence.
Yeah, meaning something depends on something else to exist.
Okay.
And then you've got necessary existence.
Necessary.
Meaning something doesn't need anything else to exist. It just is.
Okay, grades of existence. Now we're getting somewhere.
Or-
But that sounds a little complex to me.
Well,
Can you maybe give me an example of what those two types of existence, contingent and necessary,
sure.
what they actually look like?
Absolutely. Okay, so think of a chair.
Okay, a chair.
It exists because someone built it, right?
Yeah.
Using wood metal fabric.
Right.
All those things had to exist first
Right.
for the chair to exist.
Makes sense.
That's contingent existence.
Contingent.
But God, according to Descartes, that's different.
Okay. Different how?
He doesn't rely on anything else for his being.
Okay.
His existence is self-sufficient,
Self-sufficient. Okay.
woven into the very fabric of reality.
Whoa.
That's necessary existence.
Okay. So Descartes is using these different grades of existence to elevate God to set him apart from everything else.
Exactly. And this is where he goes all in with this argument.
Oh, really?
He's saying that God's existence is so fundamental, so intrinsic to the nature of reality that it's impossible to even conceive of a world without him.
Wow. Okay. But you know how it is with any big, bold claim, right?
Oh, yeah.
People are going to come along and try to poke holes in it.
They're going to try.
So what were some of the major objections that got leveled at Descartes' argument?
One of the biggest came from a philosopher named Catterus.
Catterus?
And he basically said, hold on, even if the idea of God includes existence, how does that prove he actually exists in the real world?
Yeah, I can see his point.
Right.
Thinking something exists doesn't automatically make it so. If that were true, I'd have a winning lottery ticket right now.
Haha, exactly.
So were there other objections besides Catterus?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Like what?
Another challenge was this thing called the existing lion problem.
Existing lion problem.
Yeah, it goes like this.
Okay.
If Descartes is right, and we can prove something exists just by thinking about it as existing,
Mm-hmm.
then couldn't we prove anything exists?
Ooh, I see where this is going.
Right. A talking unicorn, a mountain made of chocolate. The possibilities are endless and absurd.
Yeah, so basically critics were saying Descartes was playing fast and loose with the rules of logic in existence.
Right. And another philosopher, Leibniz, he chimed in with his own critique.
Like Nick, okay.
He argued that Descartes was only showing that if God's existence is possible, then he exists.
Okay.
But Leibniz pointed out that's a big if.
A big if.
Does God have to be possible in the first place? That's a separate question.
Right.
Altogether.
So critics are really hammering on this argument from all sides.
They were.
So how did he respond? Did
Yeah.
he just kind of throw in the towel?
Not at all.
Okay.
Descartes was a philosophical heavyweight,
He was.
and he came back swinging with some pretty strong counter-arguments.
Let's hear it.
First, he doubled down on his idea of clear and distinct perception.
Okay, clear and distinct perception again.
Yeah, he argued that the very nature of God, with all those perfect attributes, is something we can directly grasp as true, just as clearly as we can see a tree or feel the warmth of the sun.
So he's saying it's not wishful thinking. It's about this deep, unshakable intuition.
Exactly. And to address that existing lion problem, he emphasized the difference between God's necessary existence and the contingent existence of everything else.
Oh yeah, those grades of existence.
Right. God doesn't depend on anything else for his being. His existence is self-sufficient, woven into the very fabric of reality. But everything else, chairs, lions, chocolate mountains, they all rely on something else to exist. They're not in the same league as God.
Okay, so he's drawing a clear line
Yeah,
in the sand between God and everything else.
exactly.
But did he address Leibniz's point
He did.
about whether God has to be possible in the first place?
Yeah, it gets pretty complex.
Oh boy.
But the gist of it is this.
Okay.
Descartes believed that God's essence His very nature includes all perfections. And existence, as we've discussed, is a perfection.
Right.
Therefore, God's essence necessarily includes existence.
I see.
It's like trying to conceive of a square circle. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
In the same way Descartes would argue, it's impossible to conceive of God without existence.
So he's saying the very concept of God is like inextricably linked.
It is.
To the concept of existence.
That's right. And to address another objection about the possibility of like contradictory attributes in God, Descartes argued that all of God's attributes, omnipotence, omniscience, goodness, they're all interconnected and ultimately one.
Okay.
They don't clash with each other. They form a perfect, unified whole.
Well, Descartes certainly had an answer for everything.
He tried.
But there's one more major objection we need to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that existence is not a predicate.
Ah, yes.
This was made famous by Kant, right?
You got it. This one is a real head-scratcher, and it gets to the heart of what it means to exist.
Okay.
Kant argued that existence isn't a characteristic. You add to something like saying this apple is red and exists.
Right.
Existence is simply the fact that something is there.
Okay.
It's not an attribute.
Yeah.
It's more fundamental than that.
I think I see what you mean. It's like you don't describe a table by saying it exists. It just does.
That's a great way to put it.
Existence is a given, not a descriptor.
Right. Kant used this example of 100 thalers, which were these coins back in his day.
100 thalers, okay.
He said there's no difference in the concept of 100 thalers, whether they exist or not.
Right.
The concept is the same. It's just a question of whether those coins are actually out there in the world.
Okay, so how does this apply to Descartes' argument?
Yeah.
If existence isn't a property, then how can you say it's part of God's essence?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's a challenge that still gets debated today. If existence isn't an attribute, then how can you logically include it in the definition of anything, even God?
So is this a knockout punch for Descartes?
Well,
does Kant's argument completely dismantle the ontological argument?
Not necessarily. Here's the fascinating twist.
Okay, I'm listening.
Descartes was more focused on ontology, the study of being, than on formal logic. He was interested in the ultimate nature of reality, and he believed we could access that through intuition and reason, so he might not have been as bothered by Kant's objection as some other philosophers.
I'm curious, how would Descartes' focus on ontology, change his response to Kant's criticism? What would he say?
Well, remember how Descartes viewed essence and existence as inseparable, especially when it came to God. He believed that God's essence is so perfect, so complete, that it must include existence. It's not an added extra. It's baked into the very being of God. And his concept of rational distinction, the idea that the difference between essence and existence is ultimately in our minds, actually aligns with the idea that existence isn't a separate property for Descartes, a thing. Just is its existence. The two are intertwined, inseparable.
So he's not adding existence as an extra characteristic. It's more like existence is fundamental to what a thing is, especially when it comes to God. It's like saying God is existence itself.
Exactly. And remember, for Descartes, the ontological argument wasn't just about cold, hard logic. It was about a profound intuitive grasp of truth. He might have said, look, when you truly understand the concept of God with all his perfection and power, the necessity of his existence just becomes clear. It's like a light bulb going off in your mind.
So in a way, he's sidestepping the whole existence as a predicate debate by saying it's more about a direct experience of God's being.
That's a great way to put it. Now, even if Descartes had a clever retort for every objection, does his argument ultimately hold water? That's a question philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries.
Well, I have to admit, even if I'm not fully convinced, it's incredibly thought-provoking. Descartes really pushed the boundaries of philosophical thinking, but where do we go from here? What are some key takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, I think what really stands out to me is how Descartes took this abstract concept of God and tried to ground it in something concrete, something we could grasp, you know? Using logic and even experiencing it through intuition. It's pretty audacious to try to bridge that gap between the divine and the human mind.
It is, yeah. And he wasn't just playing around with ideas, He was really committed to proving God's existence.
It was important to him.
Yeah, it was fundamental to his whole philosophical system.
Right.
Remember, he was trying to establish a foundation for knowledge, a way to be certain about anything at all.
Yeah.
And for him, that foundation had to start with God.
So it's like he was building this philosophical skyscraper.
Okay.
And God was the bedrock, the essential support for everything else.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can really see that in how he built his arguments. Yeah.
How he responded to those critics.
He was fighting for it.
He was. He was always trying to reinforce that foundation, trying to show that belief in God wasn't just blind faith.
Right.
It could be supported by reason and experience.
And speaking of those arguments, those grades of existence, we can't forget about those.
Yeah, those were important.
That was a pretty clever move.
Yeah.
Distinguishing between contingent existence,
Yeah.
the kind that depends on something else,
Right.
and necessary existence, that self-sufficient, independent kind.
Exactly.
It's like he was saying, look, everything in the universe needs a cause, needs something to bring it into being.
Yeah.
Except for God. He's the ultimate uncaused cause.
Right. And that idea of necessary existence, that really sets the stage for his whole argument.
It does, yeah.
It lets him say that God's existence isn't just like a possibility, it's a necessity.
It has to be.
It's woven into the very fabric of reality.
Even if we don't completely buy into every detail of his reasoning,
Yeah.
it's hard not to be impressed by how audacious Descartes' project was. He took on one of the biggest questions humanity has ever faced.
Yeah.
Does God exist?
Right.
And he tried to answer it using the power of the human mind.
And we can't forget the impact his work had. I mean, it sparked centuries of debate and discussion,
Yeah.
shaped the way philosophers and theologians thought about God, existence, and the relationship between the two.
Big questions.
Yeah, even if you disagree with his conclusions, you can't deny how influential his ideas were.
So what does all this mean for us today? I mean, for someone listening to this deep dive, even if we're not, professional philosophers, how can we connect with these ideas in a meaningful way?
Well, I think Descartes' work, even all these centuries later, it still challenges us to think deeply about our own beliefs.
Yeah.
Like, why do we believe the things we believe?
Mm.
Is it based on faith, reason, experience, or some combination of all three? And how can we really be certain about anything?
These are tough questions.
They are. There are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But wrestling with them, it can be incredibly enriching.
So it's like he's inviting us to examine our own mental furniture, to take stock of what we hold to be true and ask ourselves, why?
Exactly. And even if we don't arrive at definitive conclusions, the very process of questioning, exploring different viewpoints, engaging with challenging ideas,
Yeah.
it can help us grow intellectually and spiritually.
That's a great point. It's not just about finding the right answer.
Right.
It's about stretching our minds and deepening our understanding of the world and of ourselves. So for all you deep divers out there, keep exploring. Learn more about Descartes, the ontological argument, other philosophical debates.
Yeah.
Check out the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, read some of Descartes' work, listen to other podcasts on the topic.
There's so much out there.
There is. And remember, there's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider, more questions to ask. That's what makes this journey of intellectual discovery so exciting. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Descartes' ontological argument. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those thoughts flowing.